I have great pleasure to introduce you Påla Veidena. Påla Veidena is from Oslo University College of Applied Sciences, and he is interested in many issues in social sciences, especially in a social theory and history of sociology. And he is great admirer of the first period of Czechoslovakia, and of course Masaryk and Franz Kafka. And the original idea of this seminar was designed during last Pål visit in the pub, when we talked with our friend from Portugal about the Masaryk and Czechoslovakia, and during this meeting I have obtained the idea that it could be very interesting both for my colleagues and for students as well to listen some different point of view about the Masaryk sociology. So this is the main reason of our meeting today, and I will hope that it will be very interesting and that you enjoy past lessons or introduction to Masaryk sociology.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice to be here again. I'm not native in English, as you probably will hear, but you're also not native, so that's okay. It's sort of obscure, I guess, to bring a teacher from Oslo to the Czech Republic and Pilsen to talk about Thomas Masaryk. But then again, I think there are some basic ideas and some discussions going on his place in the history of sociology, and whether his theories have something to add today, or whether he was only a great politician, or whether he was a great sociologist or not, so to say. Or why, of course, the question always comes up when you discuss Masaryk and suicide. Is, of course, the real sociologist on this topic is, of course, Emil Durkheim, as you know. I guess you read this as sociology students, I guess, or parts of it, so familiar with his theories. But there is no reason to actually forget also this book, Thomas Masaryk's study. This is the English version, printed in America, in the US in 1971, I think. Suicide and the Meaning of Civilization. As you have noticed, I am not that pedagogically modern as my colleague Einar Øvre, so I will stick to something Stone Age things as this one, and talk a lot and mention some names and so on. So you may take notes, but you won't get any handouts or PowerPoints or whatever. But I've written a lot of notes here. So. The interesting, I discovered Thomas Masaryk as a sociologist, and that's not very common in Norway or Scandinavia, of course. But I discovered him when I read a biography of Alexander Dubček, which you probably have read about, the leader of the 68 government in Czechoslovakia, and then later come back in 1989, of course. And I was always fascinated by Dubček. And he has actually, then I was told about that there was this great man in the first Czechoslovak Republic, that the 68 revolution of Czechoslovakia could point back to some of the ideas of this now very well-known first republic in the Czech history. So that's the reason why I discovered this guy, actually. I was educated as a sociologist in 1987. I haven't founded a work yet. I was applying for work, and I sat in the library and read books about Czech history. Probably not the best way of getting a work in Norway, but anyway, I did that and discovered this interesting man. The first thing about Thomas Masaryk is, of course, that we have to have a grasp of what in sociology is important always, this time-space dimension. Sociology tends to forget the theories people are living in practical communities, in practical settings, in time, right, and in space, also in countries, districts, and so on and so on. A lot of sociological theory is way too abstract, right? Theories about modernization, theories about whatever, even suicide, and I think we understanding Masaryk is to understand the time he lived in, and that's the first point, that Masaryk actually lived in a time and did research in a time of history where the classical sociological theory was discovered or written down from modernization, from tradition to modernity. Put it very simple now, I know. But as sociology students, you know that sociology copes a lot, struggles a lot with this going from tradition to modernity, right? That is sort of the age between 1880 and 1920. You know, everything happened in a way. You know, tradition went down, the modern society was established, democracy, women's rights, and so on and so on. People moving from the countryside to the cities, and so on and so on. And my students in Oslo are always amazed that I talk about the modern society, meaning Berlin 1900, and not Berlin 2015, for example. But the concept of sociology might be that our concept of modernity is old-fashioned in a way, because you all heard about postmodernity and all these concepts of what comes after the classical modernity. Masaryk lived the period of, you know, this struggle between tradition and modernity. He lived that period. Other sociologists could, you know, lean back and study this as historians, but he lived in this period. He fought the battles, so to say. And in the German original of his book, which you can for free download from Google Books. I did it once more yesterday in my hotel room. So that's the German original from the University of Vienna, 1881, I think. And there he writes, and he used the concept of Kulturkampf. Also Kulturkampf, also the German concept of clash of cultures in a way. You know, this struggle between modernity and tradition. What does it mean? Well, one thing is sure, it means religion, right? Religion is tradition. Okay? One measurement of tradition will be religion. Agree? Agree, Professor Øvby? Yes, thank you. So, you know, you have to have to grasp on what's the role of religion? Will it disappear when modernity really takes on the new sciences, natural sciences? You can't prove there is a God. So why should you believe there is a God? Well, it's because we have traditionally believed in Christianity and God and different aspects of Christianity and other religion for that matters. But of course in Masaryk's place and time there was a question of Christianity and the role of Christianity and the role of religion. And the classical view is of course very, very important and very simple. Religion means integration. Okay? I mean, if you're part of a religious community, you're integrated in the community. Very simple as that. Meaning religion has a function. And you know that, of course, not from Masaryk, but better proved from Emil Durkheim and his book on the suicide, written 16 years after Masaryk, and with one reference to Thomas Masaryk. Also not that much, just mentioned once in his book, in his French original. Masaryk fought these battles with himself, so to say, and others for that reason, trying to get a grasp on the role of religion. And his theories can be outlined like suicide will rise when religion and modernity prevails. Also meaning more modernity, less religion, more suicide. It's a very simple theory. It's an empirical theory. You can test it. Is it right? So he was, a very eager empirical researcher, not only social philosopher. Now, that was Masaryk's first problem. He claimed to be a sociologist. But the Viennese academics, they've never been very modern, actually. So, you claim to be what? A sociologist, Sociologie in German. And they didn't have that as a subject at the University of Vienna. They had it on other universities, had begun in North America, but certainly not in old-fashioned, partly deeply reactionary, of course, Viennese academic studies. So when he handed in his doctoral thesis on suicide and his book, they thought, what is this? What is this? This is strange. He's talking about suicide, a lot of statistics, and he has some theories, and he calls it sociology. Could we make this as could he get his degree at all? Is he a real philosopher? Because, of course, the title was philosopher, right? Practical philosopher. He was not in a strictly sense, a sociologist, but there was a work of sociology. So Masaryk, that was one of his first battles, to fight this for, come on, you old guys, this is the new, this is the future, right? We have to establish this as a way of looking at things. That's our sociology as a way of strengthened moral, right? So that's my first point in this moral theory critique, and this sociology as strengthened moral in society. But if you have to strengthen moral in society, you have to know what's the moral problem. And the moral problems are not only philosophical problems, they're practical sociological problems. You know, people don't belong anymore. They don't believe in anything more. They have a lot of subjectivism in their heads, and so on, and so on, and so on. And you must understand Masaryk's theory on suicide as a part of his general theories, his general aspects, view on life, view on science, view on democracy, view on progress, view on the Czech history, and so on, and so on, and so on. There is a very integrated person in a way. Masaryk found that, you know, men are struggling with modernity, men are losing the moral, the religious grips on himself, and he's pointing toward this terrible cultural downfall of way too much suicide in the population. And his book is full of this. A lot of statistics, just like Emil Durkheim 16 years later, showing in details different statisticals on this. But this is interesting. Masaryk was first and foremost a sociologist of history. He meant that history has a meaning. This is important. Are you familiar with that standpoint? Yeah, that Masaryk, well, you're familiar, but are you familiar? you know that's one of the controversies around this great man, of course. He meant that history has a meaning. Okay, history has a meaning. We have to fight, of course, in the right direction, but history itself has a meaning. And of course, particularly he wrote in later books the meaning of Czech history. You know, the Czechs, you're just not another people. You have a meaning with your history, fighting for democracy, fighting for a better world, fighting for more openness, fighting for, of course, tolerance and integration. You know, this mixture of ideals, morals, and everything. The history has a meaning. This is one of the controversial things in Masaryk's history, because if history has a meaning, who is to tell this meaning? If the German philosopher says the history has this meaning, and the Czech philosopher says history has this meaning, who's to judge this? Masaryk always came back to sort of a moral standpoint, of course, deeply rooted in Christianity. As you know, he was a Christian, no doubts about it. He converted to Protestantism. But he, in a way, he didn't believe that much in church and organizational religious life. He meant that Christianity is inspiration of Jesus. That is an ethical question, right? That's Masaryk's moral. It's an ethical question for you as an individual. You can learn from the examples of Jesus Christ himself. You can learn to be a good person, more moral person. That doesn't mean, you know, that this moralism of modernity, you know, you shouldn't drink, you shouldn't have sex before marriage, you shouldn't this, you shouldn't that. That's not his view, actually. Although I think he didn't drink much wine or beer. As a Czech, that is strange, I guess. But his moral views was actually that more integrated in a way, and very personalized. The way of winning this Kulturkampf, this terrible fight between, you know, the evil in the form of suicide, for example, is, you know, to learn the people to be decent people. You have to take responsibility for your own life, and you have to do it with other people. And the Czech people, the Czech nation, has a particular a role to play in this drama, this fight. Of course, you all knew what he was fighting against, also in this Kulturkampf. He was fighting against the Habsburgs, of course, you know that. So the Catholics, He left the Catholic Church. Of course, he had to leave the Catholic Church for personal reasons, and of course also for political reasons. He couldn't stay as a Catholic anyway. He had to be a Protestant. It was said about him when he come back to Prague in 1882 at the Charles University. He had been controversial, acknowledged, fearless critic of outworn traditions and aristocratic privileges, an advocate of liberal rights and democratic forms of participation. And as you all know, there's several books about Masaryk, how great he is, how moral he is, the first Democrat and all that stuff. I'm stressing this because it has something to do also with his view on suicide. He's morally shocked about this. This is a sickness. We can't have it like that. It can't continue to be like that. He wasn't only a researcher, leaning back and saying, hey, here's my statistics, it's very interesting. And he was morally shocked about it. And he took part in it in a way, right? Arguing again that we can't go on in that way. It's said about him that he was an astonishing clairvoyance picture of the European crisis as early as 1878. Masaryk, like nearly every good sociologist, talk about crisis, right? The crisis of our age. Sociology is, as you know, it's always been in crisis. How to cope with sociology, and even worse, how to cope with all the crises around in Europe, for example. Constantly crisis. Can you name me one period where there's not been any crisis, actually? Well, Masaryk, anyway, he thought they lived in a really time of crisis in the 1880s, 1890s. Described, for example, from his colleague here, Emil Durkheim. I should write his name on this rather chaotic board. Also, Durkheim meant, as you know, the French society was in a crisis, right? Why? The class struggle, the struggle between religion and non-religious people, the struggle between monarchists and the republicans, these really hard struggles of the Third French Republic. Masaryk wrote nearly the same 16 years earlier. Right? Exactly, more precise by Durkheim, but Masaryk had the same view. And in my view, Emil Durkheim could have been a little more friendly to Masaryk and referred him more in a general way, because what I think is that the theory of suicide in Masaryk's writing is picked up by Durkheim and made more scientific. As Durkheim is the greatest sociologist, of course, of those two, also on the studies of suicide, no doubt about it. Masaryk's book on suicide is a very moralistic book. You should really read it. He argues against everybody. He's strongly moral. How can you write that? That's terrible. This philosopher hasn't understand anything, and so on. It's a scientific book, but it's also a very moralistic book in a way. Whereas this one, it's just boring, right? Because it's so scientific. And he's probably right. I must admit that. But Masaryk, is our guy. But Durkheim is in a way the greater scientists. No doubt about that. So, this need for a new moral. It says that Masaryk remained an individualist, an enemy of all modern form of collectivism. It is claimed. Also, he remained, strangely enough, in a way, a strong believer in the individual. As I mentioned already, you have to take moral responsibility. That's not only his moral, that's his theory as well. It's a sort of individual sociological theory. He remained individual. The new mass movement, said about Masaryk, they have no moral standards. The new mass movements, meaning labor movement. Masaryk was a friend of the labor movement, partly at least, and of course also the Christian Democratic mass parties. He was skeptical against this mass movement because he meant they were collective movements not representing morals. And the worst was, of course, guess who? The great sort of sociologist? Karl Marx, of course. 1818 to 1883, 4? Any suggestions? Something like that, huh? Karl Marx, of course. A very misused man, of course, in the former Czechoslovakia until 1989. But Masaryk, again, was a pioneer in this field as well. Picking up ideas from his studies of suicide, he went on to criticize Marx and Engels. He did a thick book on the social question, 100 pages arguing very strongly against Marxism, Marx and Engels. Indeed, very interesting. This book was also was commented upon from Trotsky, the revolutionary leader Trotsky, and said that Masaryk hasn't understand anything of Marxism. But I think he had. His main argument against Marxism was, this is the old materialism. This is nothing else than materialism. The individual is gone. There is no moral. They haven't actually gone over this just Hegelianism, this Hegel with materialism. That's all it is. And he was an enemy, or put it that way, of Marxism, and partly a friend of a more moderate socialism, in a way. Huh? You can put it that way. But his very strong critique of Marxism, 100 pages, has also a link to his view on suicide, moral and theory, because there is a link here saying you can't also always look on the collective variables. You have to look on the individual himself. Now, that's a paradox and a weakness on Masaryk's writing, because he says individuals are the important, what matters in a way. But then again, he has a very strong fear of subjectivism. You know that he fear of people are getting alone, seeing the world just as they are seeing it, totally subjective, nothing to link to. And there we can see the other phase of Masaryk being more close to, of course, Durkheim. Although criticizing Marx, he has some sense of this view on collectiveness, of course. Men have to believe in something. If they not believe in something, they will put themselves as gods. That's what Marx and Engels want to do, right? In a way. Saying man can do everything, we can create everything out of, men can create everything, we are born free, we can do whatever, don't need kings, gods, whatever. And Masaryk said, hey, wait, be careful. Man should not be God. There is a God already. Man shouldn't strive to take his place in a way. So there is arguing in a favor, in a way, of traditional religion against this new subjectivism. But that's a paradox on Masaryk, because on one hand he's a forerunner for this new individual moral. On the other hand, his theory says, no, subjectivism, that can really judge people, meaningless, the totally meaningless world. He read Faust from Goethe, for example. I guess some of you are familiar with that. Faust, also the great scientist, who was unhappy and makes a deal with the devil, of course. How to win, and he becomes young and beautiful, meet this beautiful girl, and now I'm happy. But he made a deal with the devil. That was the problem. Masaryk sees him, and Faust was saved. Masaryk thinks that's a modern man. That's the modern man, right? He strives for something, doesn't know what it is, doesn't know the values, but he strives and strives. He wants to conquer the whole world. I want to be young again. I want to be pretty. I want to be there's no limits to it. And we can know that this way of thinking is very close to Emil Durkheim, right? Anomy on Durkheim. It's the same way of thinking. Masaryk just did it earlier than Durkheim. He stresses this in a book translated to English called Modern Man and Religion, if I'm not remember wrong. And also, as a Norwegian, it's particularly funny and interesting to discover that he actually read a book of a Norwegian author called Arne Garborg, and a novel called Trette Menn, translated to, I think in German. Masaryk must have read it in German. Müde Männer, as a sleepy men or something. Would that be translation, Einar? Trette Menn, yeah. Meaning the main person there is a guy who has stopped believing in anything. He just walk around in Oslo, that time called Christiana, and drinking, meeting friends, chasing women, nothing is it. This is no reason to live, actually. This is extremely subjectivism. Masaryk read that book with really great anxiety, using this person, Gram, in this Garborg novel as an example of modern man. Not only Faust, but also a not very famous book from a Norwegian author at the time. Meaning the same. He read this literature all over. He was a well-read man. He read this literature, strengthening his own morals and theories on the views of modernity, tradition, religion, and so on. So the point is, the suicide book is then just a way of proving his more general point, right? It's not like that he studied, like I said, in his career 10 different subjects. He has a very distinct meaning of writing this book on suicide, proving his moral theories. It's about time that anybody does that. He does it with extremely great confidence in himself. He says in the English version, "I'm quite convinced that I have rightly explained the essential nature of the sickness of our century." Now, if you write something like that in a bachelor thesis or master's thesis, you will get trouble from Thomas probably. I'm quite convinced that I have rightly explained the essential nature of the sickness of our century. That's what we teach today in sociology, not to be that, eager, try to explain the whole world. Masaryk was a young academic in Vienna, heading for Prague, of course, and was really, he knew he was something special. He must have known that. I can do this. And people will listen to it. Of course, they hated him, then they loved him, right? But he had this extremely self-confidence. And that's amazing, knowing that he came from rather poor background in border from Moravia and Slovakia. There is also a well-known fact that Masaryk, as a child, witnessed a man who has hanged himself and was taken down. He saw that as a child. This made me wonder, he says, why people are taking their own lives. That was he told to Karl Čapek many years later on this famous book, Talks with Masaryk. So that was his reason, so to say, to wonder, why are people taking their own lives? Why are they doing that? Same question as Durkheim 16 years later. And he starts out with the definition, of course, of suicide, saying, it's about intentionally and knowingly that you end your own life. Also, you have an intention to end your life, and you must know this. This is suicide in a narrow sense. Because, as you all know, also on this, Durkheim discusses this on many pages, suicide can, be more or less willing, maybe you didn't really mean it, and so on and so on. But in Masaryk's sense is that you intentionally and knowingly want to end your own life. Empirically, he has a lot of statistics. He uses a lot of statistics. Here in Austria, he begins, as claiming that he sits in Vienna, right? He begins 2,600 suicides are committed each year. In Vienna, 200. Which proves probably that it's pointing to Austria in the greater sense, including Bohemia and Moravia in that statistics. He has a lot of arguments on what is not the way to explain suicide, like natural causes and sickness and other things that are probably not explaining suicide. Just as Durkheim is doing here, right? In his books. What is not explaining it? And then it comes to what is explaining it. It's doing just as Durkheim did later. Slowly he's getting to more classical sociological variables. Also, it's variation between nations, different suicide rates, of course, gender, cities, and of course also the rural-urban variable. Because if you have a certain anxiety for this new modernity, you will also have a certain anxiety for this movement from the countryside to the new cities. He states more generally on page 33, I've noticed here, a very favorable effect on the physical and moral growth of married people is generally attributed to married life. Compared with the unmarried, it has been noted the married are healthier, have greater endurance, and their life expectancy is greater. But the favorable effect is more evident for husbands than for wives. Meaning, to you guys here, you should get married. And meaning, you girls should be more, maybe not, saying sort of the same as Durkheim. But Masaryk goes on. He says marriage in itself is not the important variable, but the lifestyle that follows marriage, the more moral lifestyle. Meaning, you know, this lone guy chasing women, 30 years old, drinking too much beer. No. That's not the moral way of live. You should get married, right? That's the moralist, Thomas Masaryk, of course. But very close to Emil Durkheim. Marriage is both favorable and unfavorable. Masaryk is not willing to say that the institution marriage is the solution. He will never forget that the question of moral. In his theory, there is the question of moral. There might be immoral marriages, of course. So not only the institution marriage, but the morals life that follows from it. He has some examples. I won't too much, but suicide per 1 million, and this is in the 1870s, 1880s. Some examples only from countries, right? Denmark, I'm coming back to the Scandinavian countries later. Denmark, per million, 258. France, 150. Austria, 120. And here another own one from Bohemia, 161. Sweden, 81. Norway, even lower, 73. And Russia, 30. And of course, you can ask the question, how have they measured this? I haven't the slightest idea. And I didn't think Masaryk had either. He picked up the statistics that were able to get hold of course. Major cities in the same period, per 10,000 inhabitants. Leipzig in Germany, 4.87. Paris, slightly less, 3.59. Prague, even less, 3.01. And Vienna, 2.85. No figures for Oslo. Masaryk is very clear on the end of his book on suicide. Yes, he says, we are facing the new modern society. Of course we are facing it. We can't stop progress in a way. Masaryk is, in a way, a moralist, but he's no reactionary. He's not saying, let's go back. As nobody can go back. And Masaryk knows that. We are facing the new society. But he says, if it were possible to guide the great masses systematically, logically, step by step, from the simple to the complex, From the easy to the difficult, from error to truth, from naive convictions to conscious instinct, there would be no struggle between conflicting views, no halfness, and every new accomplishment would represent the consistent development of previous stage of culture. Meaning, we must guide the masses. Meaning, Masaryk, you can see the young Masaryk here, is already sees himself as the great teacher of the Czech nation, right? Later he writes about the Czech nations and the historical views and so on. There he is, as a suicide researcher, he is the teacher of the nation. He knows better than most people, and he's obvious on that, right? He says it, he knows it, and it's probably true as well. He was extremely skilled young man, getting older, getting wiser, but still have this enormously confident in himself. So, of course, the discussions towards Durkheim is interesting, right? Have you as students read more about Durkheim than Masaryk? Any views on that, Tomáš?
Yeah, because my students heard about Durkheim in my lesson, they understand to compare using the mechanical and organical society with the concept of modernity, Masaryk's.
Okay, but because, as you know, Durkheim, his book on suicide was his third book. That was the book who made him famous. That was the book who made him go to Paris to become a professor at Sorbonne. That was probably the book that created in a new way the new sociology. And Masaryk, as I said, just mentioned once in his book earlier, this was the book to really establish the new concept of sociology. And the difference to Masaryk here is, of course, that in a way, Durkheim is a more collectivist. He is arguing extremely strongly against psychology. He is also arguing against, he doesn't have a particular moral view in a way. He has a sociological view. What's the solution in Durkheim's problems with suicide? Not as Masaryk says we should guide the masses to be more moral, if we only could guide them, teach them, educate them. Durkheim is saying, okay, we must organize people, we must organize, practical. It's obviously, this book has a much more concrete, practical solution than Masaryk's book, right? Saying that we should organize people within, on behalf of their professions. As you know, this theory of binding professions into each other, creating new organizations, voluntary organizations, integrated into the state as more organization. We should, also Durkheim says, make it more difficult to get a divorce. Maybe it's too easy. That's also one part of his theory, saying marriage is protecting against suicide. Okay, if that's the truth, let's do that. As you all also know, Durkheim said that Jews are more protected than Catholics, and Catholics are more protected than Protestants. But it doesn't have something much to say about that. You can't guide that in a way. So what can you do? You don't solve any problems by becoming moralistic. You solve the problem by practical solutions. Organize against on behalf of professions. Organize. Of course, no class struggle. Please. Sorry to disappoint you, but this guy is out today, at least, on our lecture here on Masaryk and Durkheim. They had a sort of common enemy. They both find Karl Marx extremely interesting, of course, but he was wrong. He was very wrong. They both agree on that. Durkheim says in a letter to Max Weber, I think, that from Mr. Marx we have learned nothing. Why? because Marx insists on struggle, battle, fighting. Right? He insists on, in a way, on a new Kulturkampf between the classes, right? That might be an interesting theory, but not for Durkheim and certainly not for Masaryk, as you all know. Saying, no, we must integrate, we must create this better organic solidarity, as you know it is called. So this organische solidaritet, instead of man running around on its own. We must have a remoralization of France as a no-class struggle and less struggles between, for example, people cheering for monarchy towards people cheering for the republic. In a way, both Masaryk and Durkheim are described as, in a way, conservative sociologists, right? But that doesn't mean they're unmodern. That is the important point. There were no reactionaries, no of them. Durkheim was, in a way, rather modern liberal, in a way. No Marxist, but certainly no reactionary guy. Masaryk the same, of course, in favor of progress, but he has his own way of describing this, what is progress, what's a Czech nation, and so on and so on. Both these theories, the moral views, has been criticized, of course. Masaryk was heavily criticized during his lifetime. When he ran for the Reichstag, the parliament, in Vienna first time, it was used against him that he was, a suicide philosopher. He was a suicide philosopher. What is that? That doesn't mean a thing. He has written a book on suicide. Yes, and he's concerned with suicide. We don't want to talk about that. That's not the topic. This suicide philosopher shouldn't be voted into the parliament in Vienna. Also used against him, of course, that he was no anti-Semite. He was struggling for, all this later Kulturkampf. Masaryk always ended up on the right side, fighting for the right also for Jews to be Jews. And of course, used against him. He is the friend of Jews. Don't vote for Masaryk. That was the slogans, right? In a very harsh anti-Semite climate. Not only in Vienna and Austria, but also in Bohemia. I'm sorry to say that. The Bohemians were no better than the Austrians, sorry. At least that time. But then again, Masaryk has survived as a philosopher and sociologist. If you have read Karl Popper's book, The Open Society and Its Enemies, where he argues very strongly against Plato, Hegel, Karl Marx, one of the few heroes is, of course, Thomas Masaryk. He's specifically mentioned there as one of the first forerunners of the open society. A society where you can have democracy, discuss, and on the other hand, he is criticized also by Popper on his view on history. Sorry, Mr. Masaryk, history has no meaning. And Masaryk said, of course it has a meaning. Of course, particularly the Czech nation, which I intend to create and drive forward towards democracy. Of course it has a meaning. And Popper said, history has no meaning. This is a dangerous thought. You're a great philosopher and a great statesman, but this is a dangerous thought. History has a meaning. Where have we learned that from? The Nazis thought that, right? 1,000 years Reich. History must move forward to that. Or the Stalinists, probably just as worse, the classless society. History must move forward. And you see, that's a dangerous thought in a way. Masaryk meant that history has a meaning. But of course he didn't mean it in that way of the word. Masaryk was also, I'm not coming to the critique now because I'm a great admirer, as you can hear, but I once met Ernst Gellner, an old hero of Tomáš, I think. And I met him with students in the Central European University when they were there in Prague. And Gellner had a lecture for us, and he said, the more I read from Masaryk, the more I admire him. And then he stops and says, but he was wrong. That's the bad news, of course. He was wrong. Now, if you haven't met or read Gellner, you'll probably see that most people are wrong all the time. You know, nothing is true, and the theories are just nothing, and you can't survive. And how can you then survive with a theory on, totally general theory on suicide, for example? Saying, just stick to religion and be moral and work in the right way, and everything will solve itself. It's a totally general theory on suicide. How can that survive? How can a theory on the meaning of Czech history survive when you know what happened to the Czech Republic? And the same Ernst Gellner criticized Masaryk for, he believed too much in France, he believed too much in the Western world. He was a friend of of these British academics and so on, and they all let him down. All his republic was let down 1 year after he died in 1938 in Munich, as you know. So he was wrong in a way. He was proven wrong. And some critics has even said that Masaryk was picked up by the communists, saying, we are now taking over the state, 1948, as you know, saying, yes, we have a meaning of this, communism. Yes, now the Czechoslovakian people are finally moving forwards. That is, in a way, a Masarykian idea, says critics, saying, it's a common idea. They both think history has a meaning. I think that's quite unfair to Masaryk, of course, because he wouldn't dream of even joining forces with the 1948 guys. But he was also, this moral figure, Thomas Masaryk, he was also quite a clever guy. When he negotiated with the new borders in 1918, he forgot, in a way, to tell the American president, Wilson, that there was actually 3 million Germans in this new state. And Wilson are quoted to say, when he heard that later, he was the American president, he didn't know much about Europe, right? And he said, why? Masaryk never told me that. That's interesting. Masaryk was a politician, of course. He wasn't a moral god. He was a politician. And he was a Czechoslovakian politician. And he will certainly have no reason to be particularly friends with the Germans. That will critics say Masaryk made wrong. He shouldn't have established a new state based on the Czechoslovakian nationalities, but knowing that it was more Germans than Slovaks, for example. We can all discuss that for hours, of course, but that proving that the man did probably some he wasn't that, he was also a real politician. He wasn't only a moral, high figure up there. I think also one critic of Masaryk, should be very clearly his rather vague concept of subjectivism, because he was in a way afraid of this subjectivism, meaning he would be afraid of new existentialism, maybe new ways of thinking sociology around social construction or whatever it might be. All these ideas mixing subjective and objective lives, well known in Berger Luckmann, social construction of reality. Probably all these new, after the Second World War, sociological ideas will be rather, I don't know if Masaryk will have, lived very well with that. His view on subjectivism was very strong and he was scared in a way, right? Because it was a question of this Kulturkampf. Too much subjectivism means that the individual loses himself as a moral person. Now, I'm not going to do what my dear colleague did yesterday, talking 1 hour too long or something, although it was very interesting. But I want to close down with some facts on, or some rather speculative theories on Scandinavia. Because as we have heard, Masaryk had his scientific views, his very interesting theories, confronted them later with Durkheim, more scientific in a way, a better sociological theory probably. But there were also studies some years ago from suicide in Scandinavia. So a newer study. Because the question is, of course, why do people kill themselves? Masaryk said lack of moral. You modern man. Durkheim say lack of integration, right? And but newer research have, of course, suggested many other things as well. And this might be interesting from a not quite new book on suicide in Scandinavia and the difference between the Scandinavian countries. And this is, I warn you, this is highly speculative. And it's probably the right way to stop this. Why have we traditionally had lower suicide rates in Norway than in Sweden and Denmark? As a Norwegian, I say, of course, we're the better people. But no, we're not. That's no good reason. An American researcher has looked into this and find 3 different forms of mother-child patterns. Also, the patterns between mother and child in these 3 Scandinavian countries: Norway, Sweden, Denmark. In Denmark, they have a higher suicide rate than Norway, and they say mothers there in Denmark will want to create dependent children. They want their children to depend on the mother. Meaning too much dependency. Too much, right? Telling the Danish mother, oh, come to me, you will always live by me. And when you grow up, you know, oh, where's my mother? Suicide. That's a short version of it. Sweden, on the other hand, and this is quite funny, mothers in Sweden will create independent children because the Swedish mother, they're very modern. They want to go out working and they have no particular joy in staying home with children. They want to leave the children. Hey, be independent. Come on, now you can do that on your own. I have to go to work. Right? Creating independent children. Sounds good, but probably maybe too lonely, too independent, right? And Norway is commented here is in between, meaning the right balance between the 2 extremes, of course. Will be in a Durkheimian sense very sensible, being in between. As you know from Durkheim, this way of looking at society is sort of, you can look at it as a fire. You probably heard that story. There is a fire. If you get too close, you get burned, of course, right? Too much integration, too much dependent. You're too dependent. Too much collectivismness. If you get far too away from the fire, you're freezing, right? Meaning you're lonely. You're not integrated. You're out there somewhere, and who cares? It's cold. You have no particular reason to live. Whereas, obviously, in this very speculative theory, Norwegians are sitting just right, 2-3 meters away from the fire. This American goes on and he says, in Swedes they will have the reason for killing themselves. Self-hatred. Self-hatred. Punish yourself because you didn't live up to expectations. Also, self-hatred. You hate yourself. I didn't make it. I'm a failure. I didn't make it. I had no reason to live. I'm a failure. In Denmark, following this modern child speculation, it will be the reason for killing yourself, the disappointment of being left. You're left from your parents, you're left from a wife or a husband, whatever, except you're alone. I would used to be dependent, I'm not anymore. So leave. So why do the Norwegians kill themselves? Strong guilt, because they have not followed the social norms. So that's the moralistic Norwegians, of course. They have guilt. We are guilty. Norwegians are very Protestant in a way, and we feel guilt every day, according to this theory at least. As you can hear, this is highly speculative. You shouldn't write it down, Thomas, but I give you the reference later. Meaning there have been a lot of speculations on this phenomenon of suicide. I think that one thing is reading Durkheim as a sociology student and sociologist, But I think, actually, you can also pick up your old books on Masaryk. If you have old books from Masaryk, you can pick up the new ones, reprinted. Learning, fascinating, very much about this period in European history, 1870s, 1890s, and forward. And also find out that actually Masaryk was a very interesting forerunner for modern sociology. So, that's what I had to say. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. So, thank you for your interesting introduction to Cyan Sociology. It's still very nice to hear that Masaryk was the first sociologist in the world. Do you have some questions or some comments?
Yeah, I have one.
Okay.
What was Masaryk's theoretical background?
His theoretical background?
Yeah.
He studied philosophy.
Well, yeah. There must have been some starting point. So what was?
Yeah, that's interesting question here, because he, as he graduated in philosophy, right, writing on Plato, and that was his favorite philosopher probably, and also the British Hume and this British tradition. But in this book, there isn't a particularly theoretical background. It's just that he has noticed that there is this. The German title is better. I'm sorry. He observes this Massenerscheinung, also der Selbstmord als soziale Massenerscheinung der modernen Zivilisation. He sees that as studying statistics and saying, why is it like that? So there are no particular theoretical background here. There are a lot of critiques in here, also criticizing, other philosophers, but there's no theoretically program, very different from here, of course. Huh?
The question probably is where Masaryk meet the statistical movement, because Durkheim was this type of very strong statistical movement in France.
Yeah.
It means. It does mean that in Vienna should be several teachers, maybe mathematicians, who started to introduce the principle of statistician.
Yeah. I guess I'm not that much into it. I just seen that he makes the same method as Durkheim, picking up available statistics. Statistics he haven't created himself,
mm-hmm.
and as you all know, Durkheim has always been criticizing for wrong errors in counting and believing too much in statistics, and when it doesn't always fit with the history, he jumps a little and says, no, that's not so important, and this country is different, and so on. So Durkheim is also very slow in German, very clever in a way. He wants his theory so much to be right. And they have that in common, the two sociologists, Masaryk also want this moral program to be the right program. He says, I quoted it, he says in the beginning of the book that, I have discovered this. This is our century, is this Kulturkampf.
And I have basically an interrelated question with the first question, because it's very interesting that Masaryk used the principle that the history has a meaning. It's the references to old German school, very classical German philosophy, to Kant and Hegel and so on. And Polatsky probably was the first historian
right.
in the Czech Republic who discovered this principle for the Czech Republic. What happened with Masaryk that he started to prefer sociology, not the principle of history, in his politics and his academic career?
Yeah, well, he kept to that idea, as you know, on history has a meaning, right? He kept to that idea, saying that history has a meaning, but he wrote from a very Czech point of view, and he certainly referred a lot to Polatsky, who was the first, I think, to wrote the history of the Bohemian. Yeah, and he first wrote it as Masaryk version in German, and then, of course, in Czech, and created this historical movement in a way. Masaryk refers a lot to Polaski in his later writings. That's his view on life. I would call it more a moral view or a political view than a scientific view.
Yeah.
Because it's from a scientific view, you can say with Popper that it's wrong. It has.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I would say that it's also a lot about how we define the science and sociology.
Yeah.
What sociology should do.
Yeah.
If there is any like further function of sociology, we define sociology or as a descriptive science, then of course Masaryk wouldn't stand. But we define it as a normative thing. Like that should say what we should do. Then you know.
Yeah, you're right. But I think the problem is that, and I totally agree with you. But the problem is, he says what we should do, but it is what we should do is become more moral.
Yeah.
Some of us, maybe the sociologists, should teach the people how to behave in a way. And that's what, apropos, that's what the communist picks up. And reading Masaryk, of course, and saying he wants to establish a Platonic republic with with the rulers from the bourgeois classes like himself and so on. All this garbage. They want to they misinterpret him very politically, of course. But there are problems in his as a strict scientific theory. But in a way, he's very open on this, of course. He's very open on this. But that Masaryk stopped being a professor and became a politician. And I think that was the right move, to put it that way. I think he was, in a way, I think he was much better as a politician than he would have been if he kept on with philosophy and sociology. I don't know, that's speculation, of course.
I could have one, it could be easier. I just want to, you said that there is a solution of suicide, according to Thomas Masaryk, and it's about the guiding muscles to be educated, to be moral, and so on. Does that mean that there must be some leaders or teachers or something like that? Or
he doesn't say that in this book, at least.
Yeah.
But I mean, he was a strong believer in education. Mm-hmm. He was a very strong believer in education, and that's so okay. That's practical sociology. You should have teaching for all, also for poor children, like himself, because he knew he was a poor guy himself. Of course, grew up and had luck, met the right people, went to gymnasium in Brno, then Vienna, and so on. So he was lucky, and he wanted, people should have the chance to do that, to read, to educate, and so on. In that sense, he's extremely modern.
Yeah.
Extremely modern. So he's not traditional. And he had, as you know, he spoke for workers' associations and all the industrial workers that they should learn as well. But I mean, sorry.
And I just added, I feel like he was really like what is important is that he was the part of the Czech national movement. So that's why the education for the common people. That's why the moral.
Yes. But I think he also meant that, the Czech nation, which established with their own state, there should also be, a better nation than, for example, old Austria, the old Habsburg Empire with their rituals and empire, all that stuff, of course, being linked very closely to the Catholic Church and so on. The new nation should be a better one, and in a way he was right, at least for some years. So.
I can answer questions. I have provocative ideas, questions maybe, because when I started to think about the common between Durkheim and Masaryk, it's still in the game. The idea of why these people who based the sociology or founded the sociology started to thinking about suicide, like the dangerous about morality, and started to design the sociology like the science who for for socialization to be much more moral.
Yeah.
Because the question, when you compare with the United States started to think a little different.
Yeah.
Because we started to organize United States, or people who live in the United States, just to want to be happy.
Yeah.
That's like the concept of happiness. And the real old Europe, where sociology was born, has the great topic to be moral. It's for me it's strange, because I think that the topic is to be happy. And we started to organize the society, to realize the member of society to be happy, not to be moral.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that at least Dekan will respond to that, you know, the person who finds his place in society, well integrated and so on, right? Not strive too much to get things you can't get and so on. You know, be integrated, you know, finding your place in society. Then you're most satisfied. He wouldn't say happy, but he would say, you know, I found my place. I'm integrated. I have my views on this and that. I'm married. I have 3 children. I have my work. I'm satisfied. Not that I say Americans say, "Oh, I would be happy. I have success," and that would for Dirk can be way too much. Way too much. That's anomie. That's, you know, striving for something you can't get and all that. Pure ideology. But if that's the difference between Europe and America, I don't know. Maybe you're right.
Yeah, because the United States, the Constitution, the original ideas of Constitution in the United States, that the United States has to guarantee to Constitution to
search,
to be happy.
To search for happiness. Yeah. The right to search for happiness. That's true. That's not a very Durkheimian idea. No, it's not. It's not. No.
Yeah, I think that it's still in Europe because the Constitution in the European Union has the rule that all people in the European Union has the law for the work, but the law for the work, it's not guaranteed that the people will be happy.
No.
It's still in play.
I agree. But even Masaryk couldn't tell us the answer here, I guess.
Okay. Any comments? Okay. Thank you for coming. And of course, for this lesson, introduction to Masaryk Sociology. And I hope that it's not last meeting from colleagues from Norway, and I hope that we will invite Påla and Einar in person in future time. I hope. So, and Einar and Påla are Einar, of course, sent me on my email presentation for yesterday, and when I will have free time,